Hi, I'm Maria Lemieux, and welcome to Lights Cable Action. Co-hosting with me today is Michael Hale, the General Manager of Selco. Recently, we conducted a customer service survey back in November of 2017. Joining us today is Michael Vigent from Blue, let me get this right, Great Blue, who was a company that conducted the survey. Mike, you've been there for about 20 years. Welcome to our show. Thanks for agreeing to come on and talk about the survey with us today. What can you tell us about how the survey got conducted, like what goes into it?
Absolutely. So the survey was conducted among 400 residents of Shrewsbury. We only include completed surveys in the process. So if somebody got halfway through the survey and didn't complete it, we would try to make an arrangement to call them back and complete the survey, but only folks that took the survey start to finish are included in the data set. And we do that for quality control purposes. We did conduct the survey entirely by telephone. Generally speaking, folks will say, well, how do you get folks to answer the questions? And the reality is a bit of that answer is transparency. So we communicate with the folks at Selco to communicate that we're going to be calling in. Our name shows up as Great Blue Research on the caller ID or some version of that. We don't use any unavailable. Importantly, the folks that we have calling into your customers or into Selco customers, we take that very seriously. So folks that work in our call center have no telemarketing experience. We want good, polite listeners. We really are an extension of you when we're making these calls. So we have good conversationalists. We call them mini conversation experts, just like your customer service folks are great on the phones. We want to bring that same approach to the survey.
Oh, that's great.
And I think, Maria, this is probably the 5th or 6th time you've done this for Selco.
Yeah.
And so we're in a pattern of every other year of doing these customer service surveys, which give us kind of a gauge of what the customer is thinking and where it gives us kind of a roadmap on what we need to tweak or work on to get better.
Absolutely, and that gives you a lot of background trending information because inevitably sometimes there's ups and downs with the data based on what's happening in the marketplace. We first started working with Massachusetts Municipal Electric Utilities back in 1997. So this has been a 20-year relationship of working with utilities throughout the state of Massachusetts. And our firm works nationally, so we have some of the comparison results there as well. But this has been a long-term relationship, even back to the early days of investigating whether Shrewsbury should offer cable television.
Wow.
So,
wow. Yeah.
So worked on those studies as well. So we have a good relationship with the town of Shrewsbury, and it goes back a few years, for sure.
And we would be remiss if we didn't say thank you to those customers that participated
Absolutely.
in the survey and took the time. There were a lot of questions on the survey, right?
83 to be exact.
Yeah.
Now, folks don't answer all 83. For example, if you didn't have an interaction with a field service representative, whether it was cable or electric, you wouldn't be asked to rate those folks. And so folks who were electric-only customers would be asked electric-only questions,
Okay.
but then we also have cable-only or combination questions. So there are some skip patterns built in, but there were 83 questions, and the average survey length was about 7 to 9 minutes, depending on which category you fell into. Again, but folks always ask, how do folks spend that much time on the phone? And the reality is, if we're not selling you anything and we're asking you questions about organizations that you have relationships with, and folks understand the true goal here is to really understand where service is strong, where it needs improvement, and so that the utility can work on those areas. So we're very transparent about why we're calling and that it's really about providing them with better service. So folks will take the time to answer the survey. We do it every day, so folks are taking the time.
Yeah, no, it's great. I mean, there was a lot of information that came out of this survey, obviously. So, what can you tell us? How did we do?
Excellent. So, so I've been doing this for 20 years in this industry, and I've worked with utilities across the board, both on the investor-owned as well as the municipal side. And overall, from an electric side of the house, you're at 91.8% overall positive ratings, 89.8% when dealing with a customer satisfaction representative, and 93.3% from a field service perspective. Those are great numbers, and generally speaking, we want to see utilities be in those mid to high 80s when we're talking about satisfaction ratings. While many car insurance companies will tell you they have a 99.9% satisfaction rating, it's super rare that we see that. If we're seeing high 80s, low 90s, that's about the pinnacle of what we see from a customer satisfaction standpoint, because there's a number of folks out there that just will not give a number 10 rating or a number 1 rating, depending on which side you're using the scale.
Do you ever knock out those, like the highest and the lowest, or
Nope.
is it just
no, I
across the board?
think one of the big variables is how many people provide a don't know rating. So inevitably speaking, sometimes you will have folks who are potentially new to a service territory that say, I just moved in, I don't know enough to rate them. So we'll provide the results with don't know responses included and with them removed, so you can see how unsure impacts the ratings, but we always want to be very transparent in who we include.
And Mike, how do you think Selco did vis-a-vis other municipal electric utilities in Massachusetts? Are we in the top tier, about average with everyone? And then also, would your firm have any data on the electric side on investor-owned utilities and how their customers rate?
Yeah, so we have a great relationship. We're the sole source research provider for the American Public Power Association, who services all of the U.S. So we do work with many municipal utilities, and I would definitely say, in addition to the state of Massachusetts, along with what we see nationally, Selco is very much in a top tier with respect to the electric rates, the electric satisfaction, how folks view your rates, how they view your service, how they view the interaction, the relationship with the utility, are all very much in the top tier. So, and there's usually anywhere from a half dozen to a dozen municipal electric utilities just throughout the state of Massachusetts that we work with on a revolving every other year basis. We'll usually have 4 or 5 a year at least, and even in that comparative group, you're usually in the top 2 or 3 consistently. So scoring very highly across the board.
And what about in comparison to privately held or publicly traded?
Yeah, so on the investor owns, we typically don't see the high 80s and low 90s. You'll typically see more of a mid to high mid 80s when you're seeing a high strong satisfaction. There's different expectations there. They're usually much larger, so there can be some different variances there. The rates can shift more dramatically. So generally, when I see a high rating on the investor-owned side, it's usually 86, 87, 88%. Every once in a while, they can leak into the 90s, but it's pretty rare. So generally speaking, with the municipal side of the house, we see we're purchasing power, we're having a relationship with folks who work and live in the town in which we do. So there's usually a better relationship. And that was something that showed through very strong in this year's survey as well, how folks viewed you in terms of being a good community partner or providing strong community service. That was a rating that went up dramatically as compared to the 2015 study that we did the last time around.
So yeah, so it's important to note that the last time we conducted the survey was in 2015. So where would you say that we've improved? Let's start with the electric side. So where are the improvements from 2015?
Yeah, so that's probably the biggest in terms of how folks viewed you as a community partner or a community service. And this doesn't mean that you're giving money away. This means that you're out and about in the community, that you're getting engaged, you're being visible, you're helping out in carnivals and trade shows and fairs and things of that nature. So that number went up from a 72% rating to almost a 91% positive rating. And that is something that folks in Shrewsbury have heard me say for almost 2 decades now. Focus on that community service and how well you're viewed as a partner in the community, and the rest will correlate. So we very much saw that. The other shift that we saw in terms of a surprise or an improvement is how well you are servicing customers and how important that service is to customers. So we saw a big shift in the folks who hold a greater priority in service over rates. Now, part of that is because they rate your rates very well, viewing that you are about or lower than other surrounding communities. So folks are feeling that the rates are reasonable here, and in fact, they're really saying service is super important to me, and that is something, A, is an expectation, but B, that you're delivering on that expectation. So those were 2 things that really stood out to me as great improvements, as great markings.
And we're discussing on the cable and electric side when you're talking
That's
about
electric side.
Okay,
Yep.
okay. So, and again, just to clarify, so where can we do better then?
So on the electric side, talking about that from a needs, I think there's two big things, and this I see across the board. So keeping in mind that we saw a very small number of dissatisfied folks, whether you're talking field service or customer service. Keep in mind we were at about 89 or 93% positive, so we're talking less than a dozen people. But something that was consistent across the board is a key driver of dissatisfaction, either on the phone or the field service side, is if I have to have contact with you multiple times. If I've got to call multiple times or you have to come back. First contact resolution is one of the largest drivers of satisfaction, and we saw multiple contacts. Now, in being realistic, we're talking about less than a dozen people in both situations out of 400 potential. And inevitably, there is a piece of equipment or something that was unanticipated that might result in a repeat scenario, but you wouldn't have such high ratings if that was happening often. So there's always outliers. That was one area. I also saw in terms of the electric side, how folks understand or the expectations they have with respect to outages and restoration of outages. There's a key difference in between what we call a normal storm, a snowstorm that shows up, versus a major storm, a hurricane, a blizzard, where you're out for an extended period of time. If there was one improvement, and of all the things that could need improvement, this is a good one, in that communicating the difference between a minor and a major storm is a big component, because, hey, if we're going to be out for a few hours, I'm not running to the grocery store. If we're going to be out for a few days, I've got to think about and plan for my own family, in addition to perhaps some elderly family members and things of that nature. So your ability to communicate and share with them, hey, this is a major storm. We might be out for a few days. We're doing the best that we can to get you up as quickly as possible, but making that designation. Now, I will say in both minor and major storm scenarios, you were rated very well in terms of your ability to get folks back online quickly. So you're doing a great job in restoration. Doing a little better job in communicating how you're viewing the storm and being realistic with folks in terms of what it is. Most folks, and we see this nationally, don't give me the best scenario, give me the worst, because I can plan for the worst and be surprised by the best. I don't like to plan for the best and be surprised by the worst.
We were talking about communication. A lot of the communication, it seems like a lot of the customers are going to the website versus getting their communication in another way.
Yeah, we definitely, and this is it is generational in many ways. As you might expect, your millennial audience is going to focus on more of your digital, more of your mobile, more of your web, whereas your baby boomer audience is going to focus on more of some of the more traditional resources. They too are also going to the web, but I think the key answer here is there's no one right answer for communication. It's a multi-mode attack that needs to be implemented across the board, and there's never going to be a perfect solution, right? And so there's different instances where everybody's going to look to the mobile. For example, in storm outages, I may not have my television, I may not have radios, but I have my phone, and I can charge it in my car in a worst case scenario. So I can still get those updates. It may not be my preferred mode, but in an outage, it may be my only mode. So it's about keeping messages short and sweet and pertinent to them.
Sure. Our focus has been moving toward more of a heavily broadband products. So how did the survey relate to that?
Yeah,
So we're shifting a little towards cable.
So now we'll shift away from the electric questions into more of the cable questions, and there's different expectations. So as we talked about, seeing expectations in the mid to high 80s for satisfaction on the cable side, on the electric side. As you get into the cable side, almost take 10 percentage points out of that. What we see in the investor-owned cable markets, if they're, generally speaking, in the mid to high 60s, low 70s, those are satisfaction ratings that we've seen in those markets. It can be up higher, generally mid 70s for the cable side of the house. What we saw for the Shrewsbury cable was 81.5% positive. So if you're looking at that side by side with electric, you might say, man, we're really dropping the ball, when in reality, when you're comparing it apples to apples, cable versus cable, that's also resulting in top tier. Now, what are some of the drivers of that? Folks are much more price sensitive to cable rates than they are to electric rates. Cable is a bit more of a luxury, although many view it as a necessity. And so there is some difference in terms of expectations there. Whereas, X amount of dollars each month to bring electricity into my home is a much more reasonable expense than what the cable may show. I think importantly, we saw strong consistencies in how service is being delivered on the cable as compared to the electric side. So when I told you, electrically speaking, 89.8% positive rating on the customer sat side, we saw 89.6 on the cable side. So I'm calling in for customer service on the cable. I'm seeing equal communication service as I am on the electric side. Same thing, 93.1% if a truck or a field rep needed to visit a home, we were seeing 93% satisfaction there. So there's a lot more turbulence in the cable market, just with what's happening with the channels and all these sorts of things. But generally speaking, I would say ratings were high in terms of satisfaction comparative to other municipal cable or even investor-owned that we've done work with, but also what we see in the marketplace as well.
And I think that speaks to it being a technology-driven business, and technology is more likely to have hiccups or failures than in the electric industry. So there is a level of frustration, I think, with the customer where things don't always work. I do think in terms of reliability, since the last survey was done, we've taken great strides in balancing the plant. And I think that shows in some of the ratings improvements on the reliability side of both video and the broadband products that we offer.
Yeah, for sure. And as we've seen nationally, as I'm sure is no surprise to either one of you, the interest in video services is dropping a little bit more, and more of the the streaming type services is what's important. Look, you walk into my house, both of my kids are watching some form of streaming. Neither one of them is watching a cable channel. So the industry has anticipated this shift, which is why, as we started to ask about the interest or support of infrastructure improvement and enhancement, folks are 100% in alignment with that. So,
which kind of goes to your original question. We're kind of circling back to it on the broadband.
Going back to the broadband and how the customer perceives broadband, and what is that what they want, and versus the video.
Yeah, so customers are telling us, and you, for that matter, that they absolutely are wanting the broadband. Internet speeds is one of the things that are most important. And again, you talk to anyone with children, they will tell you that there are devices in streaming that are happening all day long. So that is super important. It's happening. So having that infrastructure and that ability to, download and stream, and having a good connection coming into the home is super important, and customers are speaking loud and clear on that. How
sensitive are they to the cost of it?
Very. We saw roughly 40% based on potential cost increases. Just to use one example, we were starting to measure the impact of some of your more major networks, the cost to bring those networks to customers going up, and I think the difference in price was about $4.50 or thereabouts. That $4.50 is presenting almost 2/5 of your customers reevaluating whether they would keep cable services. So it's a significant scenario. Again, I don't know that the movement from or away from cable is a surprise to anybody in the industry. We've been seeing that for years. The numbers are pretty strong, and I think some of that can be captured in having the right internet streaming broadband packages, which many of your folks told, hey, if you can create a nice streaming scenario, if I can download some of this stuff on my mobile phones, that helps me. So I think there is common ground. I don't think, from what I see in the data, it's not that folks are leaving Selco altogether and going somewhere else. Some folks say, I might go to a satellite, I might go to an antenna situation, but I think it's more of their shifting in how they would potentially utilize these services. But it's something, obviously, to keep in mind and be aware of, which I know you are.
Yeah, I think one of the telltale questions, Maria and Mike, was one that you asked, that please describe which statement best describes where you would like Selco to prioritize, how they prioritize their efforts moving forward. And this was a cable-centric question. And approximately 50% of the people stated that they'd like us to focus on enhancing the broadband and making it a more robust service, whereas only about 11% said make enhancements to the video product.
Yeah.
So I think, we've talked a little bit about being at a crossroads and changing our focus to a broadband-centric company with the video product that supplements the broadband service, as opposed to in the 90s and the early 2000s, we were a cable company.
Yeah.
Video that had an internet as a supplemental service. So.
Yeah, and you're seeing a greater desire for consolidation of those streaming services.
Right.
I want to get Hulu and Netflix and other areas all in one location so I can do one search and get the best out of all of them. We also saw some pretty significant increases in the amount of folks that were subscribed to Amazon Prime as well, and,
Right.
and the Hulu. So you're seeing that shift.
Yeah,
And-
Netflix was pretty stable,
Yeah.
but you're right, Amazon Prime grew.
Yeah, but I mean, Netflix was stable at almost 50% of the
Right.
market. So that's stable because they had such a huge ramp up
Yep.
over the last few years. But again, it is a shift. You are seeing that the technology and the streaming services that are out there have almost leapfrogged in many ways what the video services are offering. So in many cases, they're able to get that same product.
Yep.
Overall, are you seeing the consumer having a higher degree of customer service? Like they want to hire, like they're more tech savvy. They demand more from their provider.
Yeah, I really think that folks, generally speaking, and this is across all demographics, are much more tech savvy as a result of being able to get information quickly, in being able to order things online and have them show up at your house 2 days later. The expectation, and this is in many different industries and services, is I want it fast. I want you to stand behind your products, and so that is very much something that needs to be mindful. We have greater expectations. Folks are able to voice those expectations, good, bad, or indifferent, more frequently, utilizing social media platforms and things of that nature. But expectations are high. But when you deliver on those expectations, which you are, folks are willing to share that good news and spread the word and talk well on your behalf. Conversely, when you miss the ball on those expectations, they'll also let you know about it. But that's okay. At least you know where you stand.
Sure. Well, Mike, how'd we do? We do good?
Overall, very well.
All right,
Very
great.
well.
It looks like you really knew what was going on in that survey. So thank you so much for all your work and coming on today and sharing it with all of us.
My pleasure. And as always, thank you for your business. Thank you for having me. We appreciate it.
Thanks.
Thank you.
So Mike, that the survey, I don't think it was much of a surprise to you as far as, I think more, I mean, it was great. Yeah. Don't get me wrong, the electric side, and again, and I'm the first person to get on here and say, customer service at Selco is great, and the survey results prove that. Yeah. But I don't think there was any surprise on the cable side that it wasn't as good as the electric side.
Yeah, and I think that's true, and unfortunately it may be true for some time into the future. The two industries are very different and expectations are very different. That said, I was pleasantly, I wouldn't say surprised, but it was pleasant news to me that we made some vast improvements over 2 years ago on how people thought about the reliability of both video and internet products, as well as we also saw an uptick in how people evaluated our support at both the help desk and out in the field and in the office itself. So on the cable side, the ratings went up from 2 years ago, and I found that to be a great indicator in an industry where most people are seeing it's probably one of the most heavily criticized or most underperforming in the eyes of the customer.
Well,
industries.
again, getting back to the survey results,
Yeah.
and I don't think, and it's not a surprise. The thing that wasn't a surprise is, you know, as we moved and as we discussed at our last show with Bob Holland, and you were talking about in your section, we are a broadband provider with video as, you know, our secondary business. So
Yeah, we went, Bob and I, before the selectmen in early January to give them an update on where we were in a number of projects, both on the electric side and on the cable side, which we can talk about in a upcoming show. But one of the messages we tried to convey to the people, which was picked up shortly thereafter by a reporter from the Telegram, Elaine Thompson, was that we've pivoted. And we've pivoted to become a broadband company that has a secondary product of video. And that somewhat reflects where the industry's going. As opposed to in the 90s, we were a video company that had a secondary product as broadband. And I think the telltale results of the survey, one of the key questions that indicates that we're going in the right direction is that the majority of the customers confirmed that that's the direction we're going in. And so it's interesting that article that was written by the Telegram was picked up by all the industry trade publications across the country.
That's amazing.
As one of the lead stories the next day in the dailies on cable. And I was getting calls from all over the country from other small to mid-sized cable operators asking me and saying, good for you, finally someone's kind of come out and addressed this issue. And so that was encouraging, and I think it kind of dovetails with what the commission approved in fiscal or in calendar year 2017 to commission an independent study and evaluate the most cost-effective and technological proof next generation product with a focus on enhancing broadband. So that study is currently underway. I'd say it's about 75% complete. We're focusing on 3 options for Selco to consider, all multi-million-dollar options. We'll have to come up with a financing plan on how we're going to carry that out. But it's exciting, and that study should wrap up sometime the end of March or early April, at which time the next month or so, or 2 months, we'll formulate a strategy and choose an option and go from there over. And that will likely be rolled out over the next 2 to 3 years. So I think we're positioning ourselves to where we want to be, and the survey is one tool that kind of provides some reassurance, so to speak, that we're doing what the customer wants us to do as well, and that's what we're here and what we're all about. We're not for profit. We're not. So we're here to serve the residents and businesses of Shrewsbury as best we can.
And from the survey, it sounds of the survey, it seems like that's what you're doing. So,
So
you're doing a good job
Yeah,
at
no, it was
that,
good.
and we appreciate it. I want to say thank you for all that hard work. Mike has also been very busy this January and has a lot of great things going on at Selco, and I'm making him hold off on discussing them because I want him to talk about them in a next show. I want to bring him back in here as soon as possible to talk about the new technology that's out there on the video side, and also to talk about the interesting, fun stuff that you have going on the electric side as well.
be glad to.
Thank you again for joining us.
Thank you for hosting.
And thank you for watching, and hopefully we'll see you soon, and have a good one. Thanks.